Good evening. Hey, Dan, how are you doing?
I'm great. Happy Memorial Day weekend to you here.
You too. Happy Memorial Day. But one of the things we wanted to get to was that we wrapped up the golf and we wanted to shift our focus to the French Open tennis, which starts tomorrow, I believe, in Paris, in Roland Garros. This is where we have Nadal, the King of Clay, who's going to be playing. But before we get to the actual draw, wanted to get your thoughts because both of us did listen to Roddick's podcast, and he was talking about how wide open this French Open was. So, wanted to hear your thoughts first, and then I'll jump in, and then we'll get into some of the very interesting first round matchups, and then we can get into the quarterfinals or even maybe pre quarterfinals.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so like we just kind of discussed a few minutes ago off the air, and as Roddick kind of featured on his Served podcast this week, yeah, this tournament for the men's side is more wide open as it's been in probably 20 years. Since the big three were, solid as far as chalk all the way through. So, excuse me. So, yeah, like we always used to be able to pencil in, Joker and Rafa and Federer. Those were three of the common uh, players that we'd see advance through to the semis in most of the majors for the last 15, 20 years. And then obviously Roger retiring a few years ago, we had Alcaraz and Sinner kind of filling one of those spaces sometimes in the semis. But this year it's really just completely wide open because we can kind of look at the top 4 or 5 seeds and just kind of do a quick comment on those. As you said, Djokovic has first time in I don't know how many years he has not won a title in 2024 yet. He's played about 4 or 5 tournaments he's entered, maybe 4 or 5. And he has yet to, I think, yet to even reach a final. He's had several first round upsets at Indian Wells. I think he had one other one where he got upset early on. And he just played this past week the tune-up in Geneva, which is unheard of for him to play a week before a major. But I guess he just really felt like he had to get some practice in, and he's been struggling this year. No one really knows why. He had the breakup with his coach with Ivan Isevich. He hasn't commented too much on that, and he hasn't really said too much as to why he's struggling. So your guess is as good as mine, but maybe he'll find his game at the French. And then we have Alcaraz and Sinner, who have both. Sinner obviously was on a roll last year to start the year. He won at the Australian Open. He was dominant there. But then after that, he just kind of had a hip injury somewhat recently. I think I forget if he had to retire from was it Madrid or he lost in Madrid and had I think he might have retired early in a match. He had a hip injury that which he's kept him out of action for the greater part of the last 3 or 4 weeks. His camp has kind of kept that quiet. We don't really know how bad that injury is. So that's a big factor with him. And then also with Alcaraz, who Alcaraz had the nice win, I think, early in the season, I think at Indian Wells. I believe he won Indian Wells to kind of reestablish himself as one of the top 2 or 3 players because he had struggled a little bit also prior to that win. But then after that, he's had a tough clay season. I don't think he's even played. I think he played one clay tournament, but had a bad. He's been battling a forearm injury, so he has not advanced very far at all in any of the clay court tournaments that he entered. And he hasn't entered any of the last 2 or 3 big ones. He's just been nursing that injury. And then the last guy we're talking about in the top four, the fourth seed is Zverev, who, we discussed before, he has a big court trial, unfortunately, for a serious issue for assault, a female sexual or some kind of assault. We don't know any details with the German court system, and fortunately for him, he does not have to be in the court for the trial. It's all going to be done with him not there for some reason. I don't know how the German legal system works, but he won't be there. But it's going to be weighing on his head, I'm sure, still during this match. And then we'll talk about the other issue when that draw came out for Zverev. We'll talk about his opponent. That's going to be on his head, for the last couple nights. That's weighing on his head too. So that's kind of why this tournament's so wide open for the first time. As far as a major in years. You can go ahead and make a few comments.
Yeah, no, I think you covered most of it, but I will make a couple of observations here. You mentioned Djokovic. Uh, like you mentioned, he has not reached a final. And it was very unusual for a player of his stature to play in a 250 tournament, like even Roddick was talking about. I did read an article this morning where Becker kind of chimed in because Becker was Djokovic's coach, if you know, before Ivanisevic won about 12 majors with him. I didn't even realize that
Wow.
Goran was his coach for 12 Grand Slams. And Becker kind of alluded to the fact that uh, that might have been a little bit to do with Novak's form. But to your point, he's not been the best yet. He has not reached a single final, which is very unusual for a world number one player, and he's still world number one. And let's see if he can find his groove. But he does have a pretty easy bracket, but we'll get to the bracket. But going to the other two players with Sinner, who has been dominant since that Australian Open, and it is very unusual for him as well to pull out of his home country, Rome. He didn't even play that tournament, so Sinner is still not 100%. And then we go to Alcaraz. Alcaraz did win the Indian Wells, and his forehand was really sharp. But then he went to Miami and he lost to Grigor Dimitrov, I think. And I think he didn't just lose. He just got, I mean, we were actually watching the game a little bit. It was during the NCAA March Madness basketball. We were flipping back and forth and watching Dimitrov pretty much embarrass Alcaraz in Miami Open. And after that, and like you said, he played a clay court tournament. He didn't look sharp there. And then he has not played any tournament. So he's actually jumping straight into the uh, French Open with almost no practice on clay. And then we already talked about Zverev. And then there's one other player, Medvedev, who's actually not been really sharp in the last few weeks. But then before we get into the actual draws, I do want to touch upon some of the players who actually played pretty well. Tsitsipas, a player whom we thought was pretty much out of the top 10, he's actually rebounded pretty well. Rublev just won a tournament. He's actually played pretty well. Fritz has actually had a very good clay court season so far. And then Tabilo, Jari from Chile, and Tabilo, who actually upset, if I believe, he upset Novak, I think,
Yes, yes, he
last in
did.
the previous tournament. So you have some of these players who are making a strong case, and that's the whole reason why we're sitting here, despite having the draws printed out. And I'm just literally up to I don't know who to pick each and every round, right from the I would say the pre-quarters, because it's so wide open. So let's get right into before we get into the pre-quarters. Let's talk about the two. Uh, I would focus on two of these first round matchups. The first one, which threw both of us, was Nadal, the 14-time champion, king of clay, is going to play Zverev. And then the second one is Murray, another Grand Slam champion, playing against Wawrinka, who is a two-time French Open champion, I think. So wanted to give your thoughts on these two first round matchups, and then we can get into the actual picks.
Yeah, I'll start with the Murray. What do you say? The Murray and Wawrinka matchup before we get to the kind of the main event, the main draw, if you will. Um, yeah, I mean the Murray and Wawrinka. Those are two guys who have won multiple Grand Slams each. I believe. I know Wawrinka. I think's got maybe three Grand Slams. Murray a couple as well. And Murray obviously battling that horrible hip injury and had surgery. He's come back nicely. We thought he was going to retire a few years ago, but he's battled back, and he hasn't really he hasn't really advanced too far in any of the Grand Slams, but he's made some nice. He's won a couple matches and been very competitive. When we thought he might have retired, a couple of years back. And then Wawrinka has not done much really in the last probably 7 or 8 years. He's kind of just at this point just a journeyman. He's in all the tournaments. Doesn't really make doesn't really scare anyone. I don't think at this point in his career. But kudos to him for getting out there and playing, and just I guess he just loves the competition. He's still out there battling. And if I had to pick a winner in this one, I think I would lean to Murray. I just think Murray is been stronger in the majors over the last year or two since coming back. He's had a lot of competitive matches, and like I said, he's won I think advanced to the second or third round in a couple times since coming back. So that's about all I think we can get out of those guys. But I would pick Murray in that matchup. How do you see that one going?
The one thing about Murray is that, and he's actually been talked about a lot by Roddick, and we both are big fans of Roddick's podcast. And he kind of, a lot of people have been questioning Murray on, how long can he go? But you can never question his heart, and he always gives 100%. He looks like he's in pain every time, but he gives his 100%, and he just doesn't lose pretty badly. Actually, he actually goes down fighting each and every time. And then, based on what you were saying, because Wawrinka has actually had a lot of injuries as well, and I'm actually going to pick Murray too, because I would like to see, because he brings a lot of energy into the crowd. The crowd is into it, and it'll be good to see Murray kind of advance a couple of rounds like we've always seen him in the past. Now let's go to the main event. Um, this normally maybe 3 years ago would have been dubbed as a final, or even the semifinal, because I think Zverev did play in a semifinal in Australian Open this year against Sinner, and then kind of embarrassed him. But Zverev and Nadal, you would think would be the final, but it is the first round. Thoughts? One thought. Well, I want to hear your thoughts on one. Was it fair to Nadal? And number two, who wins it?
Yeah, I mean, this proves that there's no fix. I guess there's no fix in the French Open draw making. I was shocked when this came out. I think I forget if you told me or I told you that this was the matchup when we found out about this on Thursday when they came out. I thought they would somehow work it out so that Rafa would, have an easy first round against a qualifier or someone, ranked below 100 or 75 to 100. That they would, give him the courtesy basically of having an easier first round match and potential, easier second round matchup as well. But this just proves that it truly is random. Is it fair? I guess. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's fair. It's just that's the way the system works. Now Rafa, his ranking because he hasn't played has slipped to 300 and something in the world. I guess the question is really when this came out, who was more upset, Zverev or Rafa? Yeah, because you can make a case that I mean Zverev's he's like, how do I get this draw? He's number 4 in the world. He's playing really well right now. He's has a couple good play tournaments in the clay court season, and like I said, his ranking. I think he just won. Did he just win in Rome? To get bumped up to number 4. And then
Mhm.
what's his reward for getting number 4 in the world? Well, he gets the winningest player ever on clay courts and the winningest ever player at the French Open. That's his reward for getting number 4. So, I'm not sure who was more upset between Zverev and Nadal when this came out. It's a shocker. It'll draw a huge crowd for that first. It'll be the biggest first round crowd ever for a French Open match. I'll tell you that, sold out. It'll be. I don't think they have lights, but it'll be the main event, the main match, probably prime time in Roland Garros at the end of the day on whether it's the first or second day there. And how do I see this going? Well, I'm gonna kind of we listened to the podcast. I'm gonna kind of go along with Roddick's sidekick John Wertheim on this one. I'm gonna pick Rafa. I think the moment's going to be the adrenaline is just going to carry him through. The crowd's going to be obviously 100% Rafa. I think the adrenaline, the crowd, he's just going to get his mojo going. And I know he struggled, and since coming back, he hasn't looked great. But I think he's going to find a way. I think the adrenaline is just going to carry him through, much like we saw Connors at the U.S. Open many years ago made one big run when he got to the semis, and I think McEnroe made one last push at Wimbledon late in his career. I see that happening potentially here as well. The other thing, the last time Rafa played Zverev at the French Open was when Zverev had that horrible injury too, when he
Yes.
fractured his ankle on the baseline. So that's something that probably not weighing on his head too heavily, but you never know. You never know what's in the subconscious, and if he's thinking about that, and if that's going to affect him in the match in any capacity as well. But I'm going to pick Rafa in 4 sets in this match, believe it or not. So
Mm.
that's kind of how I see it going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with your first point about Nadal not getting any freebie. And I think this works, right? The ranking system works. I think even Roddick mentioned this in his podcast too. There's no one is going to get a free ticket into an easy draw. So I think that was fair. But as far as the matchup itself is concerned between Nadal and Zverev, Zverev is playing as good as he can, and Rafa has been kind of up and down. I mean, he played in that Netflix thing with Alcaraz, but then he's not been 100%. Um, and I was actually watching some video of the French Open crowd was completely jam packed for his justice practice. So I know how this game is going to be, and you're right about a lot of things in terms of the crowd's going to carry him. The crowd's going to be totally rooting for him. I think Zverev is going to think that he was actually playing somewhere in Spain. I mean, that's how it's going to be. Um, but having said that, um, I don't know if Nadal physically can overcome Zverev, and I'm actually going with Zverev in this. So let's see if that will come to fruition. Although I would want Nadal to win, continue the journey, and maybe have that run like you mentioned about Connors. So let's leave it at that, and then let's go to the actual picking right now. I mean, before we get to the quarterfinals, I mean, I want to hear your quarterfinals, and I'll give you mine as well, and then we could see if there is anything in that lineup that we see that these players could stumble upon.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll just start with the we'll call it the number one seed quarterfinal, the Djokovic quarterfinal. That we'll look at those two quarters on that. I'm sorry, I guess it's more like the round of kind of the round of 16. I'm looking at. I guess they call them
Mhm.
the 1/8 finals. So in Djokovic's quarter of the draw, I'm looking at Djokovic versus either. I'm not sure about the Sarandulo Paul match. So I have Joker versus the winner of Sarandulo Paul, and I have Fritz versus Rude over there,
Me too.
and then I actually have, this is a shocker here. I hate to do this, but I have either Sarandulo or Paul, whoever the winner is, taking down Djokovic. It hurts me to do that, but I just I just can't. I don't know. I think something's off with Djokovic right now. I'm not. I don't think this tournament he's going to find it. I don't know. Something worries me about the way he's playing right now. So, and Sarandulo is Argentinian, good on clay, and Paul's been playing pretty good tennis, I think, in the last few months as well. So I could see Djokovic going down in that quarter, which I don't think that'd be a huge shocker. He hasn't done much at all this season, so I don't know if he can expect to find it all of a sudden. So and then Fritz Rude, I see Rude winning that one. I think Rude's
Mhm.
had two previous finals at the French Open. He plays clay as his best surface, so I see Rude against Paul Sarandulo, the one either one of those two, and then I see Rude getting through to the to that semifinal.
Okay, so let's stay on that same quarter. So we can do quarter by quarter. Actually, that's actually more fun. So I have um, Paul and Cerundolo. I do have Paul, and
Okay.
then Novak. It's a very interesting matchup. Novak actually has Monfils. Could actually play Monfils or Musetti
Yeah.
the third round. But I do have Novak actually playing Tommy Paul. I like your comment about Cerundolo, Argentinian, who's very good on clay. But I think Tommy Paul has actually been playing pretty well in the last few months. And I have a Novak and Tommy Paul, but I'm actually I'm sticking with Novak. I mean, I know
Okay.
you're not sticking with your guy. I'm
I like
sticking
to
with
hear
Novak. And
that.
then it's very interesting. You have um, Fritz and Rude. I do have them as well. And this was actually a tough pick for me. I do like Rude because Rude has actually been in the last two um, finals, I think, in the French Open, right?
I
Or
don't
the
know,
previous
I'm not sure
two.
about the last two, but he has got to two. I know he played Rafa in
He
one, and
played
then
Rafa and he played
yeah.
Djokovic back to back, and
Oh,
then
okay. All right.
yeah, and and then he lost both of them. So I do have Fritz actually winning that matchup, and I have a Fritz and Novak, and Fritz actually taking down Novak. So
Oh wow. Yeah,
I'm actually
Fritz going to
having
the semifinals. Okay.
yeah. So
Wow.
I do have Fritz actually going to the semifinals. It'd be great from an American standpoint. I mean, so that's where I see it. So let me go the second quarter, and then you can wrap up the second quarter. In
Sure.
this, because I know I already picked Zverev beating Nadal. I
Right.
do have Zverev playing Kachanov in the pre-quarter final. Kachanov is a very he could definitely surprise people because
Yeah.
Kachanov actually has to get through Rune to even get to play Zverev. Rune is again one of those players. I mean, if he goes on, I mean, he's one of those guys who's very talented. It's almost like a I wouldn't put him in the Kyrgios camp yet, but Rune is someone who's coming from a great country like Denmark. Very quiet. I mean, he seems to have a lot more um, problems on the court,
Yeah.
and I do have Karen Kachanov beating Rune and playing against Zverev, and I do actually see Zverev advancing to the quarterfinal. And on the other side, I do have the Australian Alex de Minaur playing against Medvedev. And this was actually a very tough pick for me because de Minaur has been playing well. He's very impressive. He makes to a lot of the quarterfinals, and he actually makes a lot of the pre-quarterfinals as well. But I do have Daniel Medvedev advancing in the matchup with de Minaur, and I have Medvedev beating Zverev to play the semifinals. So it's going to be a Fritz and Medvedev for me in the
Hmm.
semifinals. And I'll let you chime in uh,
Okay.
for your quarter there.
So yeah, I got very different picks here. As I mentioned, as we discussed, Rafa in the first round beating Zverev, and I think he's got a pretty easy path through to the we'll call it round of 16. I didn't see many people in the way, although anyone could put up a good fight against Rafa because he's just he's out of practice. But regardless, I see a Rafa Kachanov round of 16. Like you said, Kapchanov is always there in the Grand Slams. He's getting to the round of 16, the quarterfinals quite regularly over the last couple of years. Solid player. I agree. I think he's going to beat Rune. I think Rune's a head case right now. I don't think he's got what it takes to get through to a major, to the quarters just yet. Um, and then in the lower half, I have, as you mentioned, the Australian de Minaur, who's been playing great tennis the last few years, and Medvedev. And I see, I know you had Medvedev there. I have de Minaur winning that match. And then I have Rafa beating Kachanov. I don't think that's a huge shocker. But then I do have Demon. I think his final run is going to end in the quarterfinals. Rafa's. I think he's going to lose to Demon Hour. So I have Demon Hour against Rude
Rude.
semifinal, and you have Medvedev against Fritz.
Wow. Well,
So
that
yeah,
tells you how wide open this
yeah,
tournament is, and it is amazing that it's actually good for men's tennis. But let's see if that will come to fruition. So let's go to the next one. I'll let you go first, and then I'll
sure.
go to the third quarter.
Okay, so yeah, in the I guess we'll call it the Alcaraz quarter. Yeah, so the Alcaraz section. So I have Rublev, Tsitsipas in the round of 16, and Shelton. Shelton's not really a clay quarter, but I just think still, I think his serve. I don't care if it's on clay or in quicksand or whatever, wherever he's playing. I think his serve is just so dynamite. Hopefully he's starting to kind of learn how to just kind of construct points, not have to go for the winner right away. And clay will teach you have to kind of be patient and do that. So hopefully the clay court season has taught him that a little bit. So I have Shelton getting to the round of 16, which means he beats FAA in the previous round, and FAA has struggled over the last few years. So I have Shelton versus Alcaraz in the round of 16. And then as far as who advances, I have Tsitsipas beating Rublev. Rublev is still always a bridesmaid, never a bride. As far as he's, I forget his record in quarterfinals and majors. I think it's 0-7 or 0-8. It's 0 and something. He has yet to win in a quarter. I don't think that's going to change here. I think Tsitsipas, this is his best surface, we all know, and he's been playing pretty well in the clay court season. So I have a Tsitsipas versus I have Alcaraz beating Shelton. And I think it's going to be Tsitsipas over Alcaraz. I don't trust Carlos's forearm all the way yet. I still think injury is a little bit of an issue, and I think Tsitsipas. I think he's just this is his best surface. I think he's going to play a good tournament. I could see Tsitsipas beating Alcaraz here and getting to the semifinal. So let's hear your picks there.
So I have the same. I was so conflicted when you picked Rublev and and Tsitsipas, and I have the same. But I was actually going to pick Rublev based on the fact that he recently won. And but Tsitsipas, this is his, I mean, he's actually been in the final of the French Open. He was actually up 2-0 against Djokovic, and Djokovic came and beat him 3 years ago. So, but I'm actually going to stick with Tsitsipas. He's actually been on a pretty good run. And then the Shelton Alcaraz matchup was very interesting to me. And but I do think that Alcaraz, I mean, if he can find his forehand, I mean, which is where that's where that being talked about the problem, and that was the one which he was actually that was his weapon. But uh, this is the one where he can actually get a lot of drop shots to keep like Shelton off balance, especially in clay courts. Very tough to move quickly to the front. I do have Alcaraz and Tsitsipas, and I'm actually going to stay the other way. I'm actually going to go with Alcaraz. So you have Tsitsipas,
Yeah.
I have Alcaraz there.
Yeah.
So let's go to the final quarter. Let's call it the Sinner quarter, and I'll go first. On the pre-quarterfinals, I do have Sinner playing uh, Nicholas Jari. This is a guy that even JW Wartime thinks that he's actually going to go to the semifinals. I think so. I mean, he's been playing well. Jari's been playing well, and then I have Tabilo, the guy who took down Djokovic against Herkax from
Mm.
Poland. And I think between Nicholas Jari and Sinner, I'm actually going to go with Sinner. I mean, although I do think that Jari has the game to beat Sinner. Hopefully his hip is much better for Sinner. And then I have Herkax playing against Sinner. And I think that'll be a good match. But I see like Sinner has got the experience to move on. So it's going to be a Sinner versus Alcaraz for me on this part of the draw.
Yeah, so I've got a couple differences here once again, which is good. Like you said, it shows how wide open things are. There's really no chalk that's gonna, I don't think, happen here this year. So I have Herkaz also in the pre-quarter against Dimitrov. Though I have Dimitrov is actually he's the 10, he's number 10 seed. We haven't really talked about him much. He's been solid in many of the majors of late. You know, he's had a couple. He had that win, as you said. I think down. I don't know if he won Miami, but he beat Alcaraz there. I think he got to the finals in Miami and possibly won. So I have so I have a Herkaz Dimitrov pre quarterfinal. I'm sorry, pre quarterfinal, and I have Dimitrov winning that one. And then down below with Jari, I also have Jari because this, like you said, listening to John Wertheim, big fan of Jari. He's a Chilean. He's been good French. He's had a good clay court season. And I have Jari playing Sinner and Sinner prevailing in that one. And then in the Sinner Dimitrov quarter, I actually have Dimitrov. I think Sinner's just going to run out of steam at this. I mean, we all know majors are 2 long weeks, grueling weeks, a lot of long matches potentially, and with Sinner's hip, I just think it's gonna. I think he might run out of steam finally. Injury might get the better of him. So I have Dimitrov moving on here to get to the semifinal. So I have Tsitsipas and Dimitrov, and you have Sinner Alcaraz. I hope you're right. I'd rather see that one for TV purposes.
Yeah, and
I
I
hope,
think
I hope you're right.
and for the Miami Open that you talked about, Sinner actually beat Dimitrov in the final. It was a 3-1. He pretty
Yeah.
much like demolished him. I think Dimitrov took care of Alcaraz, which made it easy for Sinner, and then Sinner just dominated. So let's look at your final four here, right? I think let me correct me if I'm wrong here. You have Rude, Diminor, Dimitrov, and
Tsitsipas.
Tsitsipas. So let's look at the Diminor and Rude matchup. Who do you have going to the final?
So I have Rude prevailing there, getting to his third French Open final, and then I have Tsitsipas winning there, and that'll be his. I think he's got to one previous French Open, right? He was up two
No,
sets.
he
Love.
lost. He was up 2 sets and lost to Djokovic. So he lost the
Yeah,
French Open. So you have two French Open. You probably have two finalists of the French Open.
correct. So I have Rude and Tsitsipas in the final, and I have Tsitsipas winning this one. So yeah, so I'm going to give Tsitsipas his first. That'll be his first major if he wins it.
This is going to be a tough one. I think between Fritz and Medvedev. I was actually leaning Fritz before the podcast. Um, it'll be great from an American standpoint. But I do think Medvedev has the game to get back into the final in the French Open. And then between the Alcaraz and Sinner, um, I'm going to go with Sinner in this case. I mean, Sinner prevails, and then I do have Sinner playing against
Medvedev, yeah.
Medvedev in the final. And then I'll go first here, and I do feel that Sinner is going to take the Roland Garros trophy. So, and you have
Yeah, I have Tsitsipas beating Rude in the finals,
Ruud.
so I have Tsitsipas taking home the trophy. So yeah, so we'll see, we'll see. It's up,
This, this makes
it's
it for good TV watching because this is good. We're going to be. I mean, the fact that we have the top 16 right now, I think we're going to be watching from the third round onwards. If even a lot of our 16s actually came to fruition. Um, Very interesting. I mean, for you're picking Tsitsipas. Actually, that's a great pick. I'm a little worried on my pick with Sinner because of his injury, but I'm going to stick with the horse. I mean, he has won the Australian Open, um, and I'm predicting him to win the French Open, and that will really be. This is like the Triple Crown winner, right? Like when you have same player winning twice, then you go into the Wimbledon, and he's actually got the game to play in the Wimbledon.
yeah.
Uh, so it's going to be very interesting if Sinner wins back to back, and that's going to open a lot more eyes. I mean, he's already considered one of the best players. He has been the best player in 2024 before his injury. So I do feel that um, it'll be good for him to actually win it. But let's see. And this is anyone's game, as both of us alluded to. So like just like we do in golf, like I know we made our picks, what would be your dark horse winner if you didn't pick Tsitsipas?
Oh, if I didn't have Tsitsipas, God, that's a good question. I guess my dark horse would be I'll give credit to John Wertheim. I'll go with Jari. He's a Chilean, Chilean. The South Americans, they grew up on clay down there. They're tough. They're tough on the clay surface, and he's been hot. I think in this clay season. I think he got to the finals, or no, he had a good run. I think in Rome. That's where I've heard his name a lot recently. To be honest, to full transparency, I've never seen the guy play. I don't know who he is. Couldn't pick him out on a street corner, but I've heard the name a lot recently. And Chilean clay court. That's my dark horse, Jari. Why not?
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with Fritz, believe it or not. He's actually been playing well on clay.
Yeah.
I think Radik mentioned it as well. So I'm actually picking Fritz to be my dark horse winner um, for the French Open, and that'll be an amazing accomplishment for Fritz to win it there. And then especially it's been a while since we've had an American, take a trophy, one of these trophies home, because it's been always been dominated by the big three. So that's where we are. And then let's quickly go into the women's. I mean, I like I said, I know we can pencil in one player in the final for sure, but she does have a Achilles heel, and Iga Swiatek. I mean, this could be her fourth French Open. That would be 4 out of the last 5 years if she can win it. So, who do you think are your top four um, in the women's draw?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's funny how it used to be that the men's draw was basically chalk over the last 3 or 4 years, and the women's game is slowly shifting that way because the after with Serena kind of fading out over the last several years, we had a lot of different winners after Serena. They'd win a couple championships, then you had Ash Barty, you had you had a few other gals who made a nice run. They would win one or two and they would disappear. So I'm going to stick to basically chalk. I mean, I think you got to go. You can't not go with Iga. Obviously, the way she's been playing. Sabalenka has been to every semifinal. I think in a major in the last 2 years, or maybe even 2+ years. She's reached every semi in a major. So it's hard to
The
discount
last
her.
six, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
The last what?
Six, I think.
It's not six. Yeah, something crazy like that. 6, 7 in a row, reaching the semis in a major. Um, Coco worries me a little bit, so I'm not sure who I would pick. I haven't looked at the draw that closely. And then I think she'd be the one that might not advance to the semifinals of the top four seeds. And then Rebecca, yeah, it's hard to count her out either. She's been playing pretty good overall. So maybe the three I mentioned, but minus Coco. I just don't know if her serve. We've talked about. She's had a lot of double fault issues, second serve issues. That's been a major issue. Major issue. So we'll see how she does with holding serve and giving away free points on serve.
Yeah, for me, Iga is definitely the player to beat. I mean, she's everyone's going to be kind of going after her. But um, the one Achilles heel Iga has, it's all a matchup. Everything is in tennis is about matchups, and she actually doesn't have a great record against Rebecca actually.
Hmm.
So if it's a Iga versus Rebecca, I think I would actually favor Rebecca to beat Iga. But if there is no Rebecca and Iga is still winning matches and she actually dominates every round, I don't see anybody beating her. And funny, Sabalenka doesn't have a good record against Iga. So I think that's where, these three players have like different matchup problems with each other that I still feel like it's Iga's tournament to lose. I mean, she's been dominant. She just won recently again. I don't see her losing in the French Open unless there's an injury or anything like that. So going back, I think this has been an exciting French Open analysis. Usually we just go chalk when we had the big three, but even when we didn't have the big three, when we had Djokovic, Sinner, and Alcaraz, we just picked them, and Medvedev, we just picked them in the semifinals automatically. But now it's
Yeah.
wide open considering a lot of the unknowns, especially in terms of injuries to some of these players. So any last minute thoughts, Dan, before we wrap up the French Open? And I'll be doing a French Open recap every day, but we'll also do another mid around sometime near quarterfinals to see if we can start to see who will win it based on the quarterfinals. I mean, I know we are going with who we picked, but again,
Yeah.
it always makes it fun to pick later. Um,
Yeah. No, my
once
last couple of thoughts are just revolving around two of my favorite players of all time. Like I said, Joker, who's one of my favorites. Him, Sampras, Agassi, loved them all. I'm hoping he finds his game and can make a good push, and so that we can watch him. It's hard for us to watch the French Open during the week with work schedules and all and time differences, but hopefully, he makes it through the weekends so we can watch him. We can obviously watch replays and stuff like that, but. I'd like to see Djokovic get his form back and get the mojo back, so to speak. And then obviously we've got to find out when that Rafa match is going to be on against Zverev and try to either record that or watch it live or something, because that's it could be his last match ever in a competitive capacity. I don't know. He hasn't said really. I don't think Rafa, if this is his last tournament. I think he's talking about playing Laver Cup, which that's just kind of exhibition. That's not not a real tournament. It's fun to see him there and all that, kind of like when Roger said his farewells there a couple of years ago. But this might be his last. Sounds like it's definitely his last French Open, and we don't know what else the future holds for him. So this could be it. So hopefully, like I said, I'm hoping he can get a nice run, kind of like Connors did back at the U.S. Open in the '80s, and that'll be just fantastic. So those are my
Mm.
final thoughts.
No, I would say the same thing. Like I said, Djokovic has dominated the sport for the last few years. That it's tough to kind of count him out. I mean, in spite of the fact that he lost Geneva Open, and that could be just for him to get his feet wet because he's not played well. And someone like a Novak, who's actually won 24 of these tournaments, for him, he lives for these big moments, and I do feel that he will bring his A game uh, here. And like you said, the Rafa Zverev match is going to be the pick of the match, and obviously the Murray and Wawrinka. But one of the things I'd be more interested to see is that, considering the fact that we're going to this tournament with so many more questions than answers, I'd like to see how Sinner, Alcaraz, Medvedev, considering the personal situation he has, and the plus on top of it, he has to play Rafa in the first round. Uh, how all these players will react um, in their first round matches. So it's going to be very interesting to watch there. So, Dan, this has been a pleasure. So, hopefully, I think our both our voices sounds better. So, I'll let you know once it gets
Yeah, it's a
recorded.
long podcast we did, so I hope this worked. I hope it
All
better.
right.
We're not doing it again.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
That's true. All right. Thank you, Dan, and have a good night, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Good
Have a good
night.
night. Bye.
Bye.